because welcome to our talk on double knitting. All right, so we're going to go back and share the screen, and we're going to look at this scarf that I knitted many years ago for our exchange student, Aurora, who was a huge Harry Potter fan, and I made it to look like the scarves in the movie, so it is stockinette on both sides, and it was knitted essentially in the round with the technique that I'm going to show you today. All of the ends can be left on the inside and all of the carries can be left on the inside, so you don't have to cut the yarn because this is a hollow tube. So it's very similar to our infinity cowl in the idea of it, except that this will more or less lay flat because there's edge stitches that help it lay flat. Another way that I've used this technique in my knitting, I don't have a photo of it, but I've made a pillowcase for a pillow in my living room, and I was able to knit it essentially flat, essentially back and forth, but using the double knit technique, it makes an openable envelope of knitting. Another pattern that's very popular or has been very popular for this is in Ravelry and is called the I'm blanking on it. It's the Tiny Owl Knits honeycomb quilt. Is that right? Yeah, the Beekeepers Quilt. So these little puffs are essentially double knitted, and they can be stuffed with a little bit of fiberfill and sewn together and made into a quilt. And so here's a finished quilt, but this is what they look like. They're like little pillows. So another use for this would be to make a sachet or a little pillow. Again,
still the scarf.
Sorry?
Are you showing a picture other than the scarf right now?
I am. Is that not coming up?
No.
Oh, we're still seeing the scarf.
Okay, hang on.
Thank you. I thought that was just me, so I wasn't going to say anything.
Okay, how about now?
Yeah.
Okay, so
now we can see
the honeybee quilt, or the Beekeepers,
Yes.
the Tiny Owl Knits Beekeepers Quilt is a very popular way of using up sock yarn, or it's a very well-known way of using up sock yarn, because you cast on and you increase and then you decrease and you cast off. It's a very quick little pillow, and it can be stuffed with fiberfill and used. So this is another example of a double knit. And then I wanted to show you here's another example of double knitting. This is, and it was just May the 4th, so May the 4th be with you. And this is a free pattern for a Star Wars inspired scarf, and it is reversible. Here's all the charts for it, and it is completely reversible, and it's done in double knitting. And then the last one is the one that inspired this conversation, and it's the Lissé pattern from the most recent issue of Pom Pom. And you may not notice that it's double knitted, but if you look at the interior of the hood and inside of the sleeves, you'll see this fuzzy cream colored yarn. It's an alpaca boucle, and it's being knitted double with the cotton or the DK weight that's on the outside. And you can see where it peeks through a little bit on here. So the effect of it is to peek through just a little bit. And here's the lining of the coat visible. And you can see that it's done in squares, and the squares are all sewn together or put together. So you can see the joining of those squares here, but you don't see the striping. You don't see the striping on the inside of the coat because of the double knitting. Okay. So that's some examples of how it's used. So Lissé is by Kindred Red, and it's in the latest Pom Pom. If you do a search on Ravelry and you search for double knit, all one word, you'll come up with other patterns that can use this technique, including things like, I think that's stranded, so I think that's baloney, but these are double knit. When Christine and I first started knitting together, Christine came to me and said, could she do a scarf based on the Lord of the Rings? And the scarf was a double knit scarf, and it was essentially like the Star Wars one. And I said, no, you're not. I laughed. Yeah, Christine's here now. I laughed heartily and said, no, I really think you need to start with something easier, and suggested that she start with stranded color work. And so instead of doing a double knit, she did a stained glass vest in black and I think like Arco Iris in Malabrigo sock. And it was very difficult. It was very small, and she did an amazing job on it. And I should never have told her that she couldn't do anything, because she can do anything she wants. So
What did she do it out of?
huh?
What did she do it out of?
I believe it was a sock yarn by some company that nobody really likes.
I didn't catch that.
So, I mean, some people like it, but trust. Okay, I'm trying to do this. Oop. Share. Is it not share? Does it not want to share now?
It's not moving away from the Ravelry page.
Oh, when on the iPad. Oh, it's not. Well, let's just stop sharing. And then we'll share again via cable. Share. Trust. Hello. Connect your phone or iPad to this computer. Oh, well, maybe I have to unconnect it and connect it. Pam? One more time.
There you go.
Can you see it now? No, this should be, I apologize.
That's okay.
Something's, hang on one second, let me grab Pam. Pam, when it connects to my, where's Pam? Am I here? When it connects to my phone, when it connects to my iPad, it doesn't. You doing it by cord? Yeah. Connect this.
Trust, hit trust.
Well, when it says when prompted here, select trust. So it's not being prompted here. I think you have to start over. You have to start over with the.
I've always done it on the computer. No.
I'm going to do it one more time.
Okay.
Stop share. One moment. Technical difficulties. I think it comes up on the.
Hit share.
It's like it's not connected.
Try it on this side. It's always been on my computer. Huh.
Hmm.
You want to do your phone?
Yeah. Be right back. Next.
Small technical difficulty.
That's okay. Hey, Kim, thanks for the suggestion about that blanket.
Me?
Yeah, Julie, Lynn, whatever her last name is, L. She's
Lynn
making one. Oh, here comes Beth.
Len Henricks.
Yes, she was over on Sunday and she's working on her happenings. It is just beautiful.
Oh, good.
And I said, I want to make one, but I don't want to use fingering yarn.
Mhm.
And you told me I could use another yarn.
You
Definitely.
sure can.
And
I love Sarah's.
I love Sarah's. Yes, so I might be in the store looking for that.
Right.
Thank you for your help.
You're welcome.
I said, Kim told me I could do it.
You can do it.
I just don't want to use I just don't want to use fingering yarn.
Understood, because it is a labor of love.
Yeah, but hers is beautiful.
You could make a blanket out of it.
That's what Julie was doing, but
Mhm.
she's doing it with the fingering yarn. She's been working on it since I met her, but it's gorgeous.
Mm.
Hey, wait. There we go. No, that's just up. Chance is knocking things over. He's my favorite.
Okay. I think I'm gonna
Oh, oh, hello. There it is. There you go. This is great. And it's right down. So let's go this way. Hi, everybody.
Hey
How are
there.
you doing?
All right. So Extreme Double Knitting is a book by Alistair Post-Quinn, and it is another resource for reversible color work and offers a lot of information on doing knitting in reversible patterns. So I'm just scrolling through a little bit.
I know. I'll feed you in a minute.
Used to be I believe he used to be in this area, but now I think he's in the Boston area. And he has written 2 books now about double knitting and doing multiple color patterns. I've owned this book for years. I've never worked any of the patterns out of it. So sometimes even I'm a little daunted. And then this book is Mary Thomas's book of knitting patterns. And I inherited this from my godmother. And I love this book with a sort of a fiery passion. I'm gonna see, go this, which way is up for this? Sorry, this is not my normal setup, as you know. So Mary Thomas's book of knitting patterns is originally written in 1943.
Wow.
She's sort of a charming little old lady from London, and she talks about everything you ever wanted to know about knitting in this really sweet way where there's illustrations. So she comes up with her own symbology and she has these little illustrations and she illustrates all over the book. And she gives, like here, there's her knitting pattern stitch symbols. So if you were reading a chart of hers, that's what it would look like. And these are her charts. And she talks about knitting in just a really lovely way. And she gives these little patterns with, here's, you know, an Eskimo knitting and talking to a seal. So I've always enjoyed this book a great deal. It predates the Mary the Barbara Walker books, but it has a lot of the same information. And she wrote another one. This is the Book of Knitting Patterns. And she also wrote one called Mary Thomas's Knitting Book. I think they're both still available. And again, illustrated. This has the history of knitting, ancient and modern. And it's also sort of charming and lovely. Teaches you how to knit in both English and European methods. And there's cats. So I just throw that out there that Mary Thomas was the first place that I learned about double knitting and where I tried it for the first time. And I tried it based on this little half a page comment. So Mary Thomas tells you to cast on an even number of stitches. And I dropped my needle. So we can do that. You can do it with a solid color. So we're going to start with that. I'm just going to cast on. Let me get into the screen. You cast on. So like if you were starting a scarf and you wanted to do a scarf and have it look like it was machine made and not knitted, 3, 6, 9, 10. You cast on an even number of stitches. Hello. My book. And you knit the first row as normal. And then on the next row is where the magic happens, and then you repeat the magic throughout. So the next row, you knit 2, and then you put the needle into the 3rd stitch and throw the yarn twice around the point of the pin and draw through the double loop. Hang on a second. Okay, sorry. The instructions I was looking for were on the other page. So you knit 2 and then you knit 1, yarn forward, knit 2, knit 1, yarn forward towards you, slip 1 purlwise, and then yarn back. Knit 1, and then yarn forward, slip 1 purlwise, yarn back. Knit 1, and then you just keep moving the working yarn to the front side and slipping it without working it. The yarn is pulled forward to the front side, and then you knit on the other side until you get to the last 2 stitches. You end with a knit 2. Okay, so when I turn, I'm going to knit 2. I'm going to repeat this stitch, knit 2, and then I'm going to bring my, I'm going to knit 1, yarn to the front, slip the next stitch purlwise, then yarn back to the wrong side, knit 1, move the yarn to the front, slip 1 purlwise, move the yarn back to the wrong side and knit 1. Move the yarn back to the front side and slip 1 purlwise, move the yarn back to the other side, and we're going to end with the knit 2. So this gives you 2 stitch garter stitch edging and a little bit of the double knit in the center. So we're going to knit the first 2 for the garter stitch edge, and then the first stitch is knit, move the yarn and slip the stitch purlwise. Move the yarn, slip the stitch purlwise, knit 1, move the yarn, slip the stitch, and then the last 2 are knit 2. So what happens is that only the knit stitches on each side are being worked. And if I pulled this off, the stitches would separate and you would see the beginning of the pillow sort of forming. So that's one color of double knitting. And that's how I made the pillowcase and the scarf. And I can put the instructions for how to do that in writing on the page with the link to the class video. So again, you start with an even number of stitches. And another way that I've done this is where you knit, because you're doubling the number of stitches right off the bat, or you're knitting from the from one side and then to the other. One of the ways that I've done it is I've cast on the width that I want for my scarf. So let's say I want a scarf that's 40 inches wide. If I only cast on 40 inches, then my resulting scarf is only going to be 20 inches wide. So what I do is in the first row, I increase all of those middle stitches. So the easiest way I think is to do, so that I'm going to leave my edge stitches, but I'm going to go into each of these stitches and knit 1 in the front and the back. You could knit 1 yarn over or knit 1 make 1, however you like to do it. Just looked down and thought, oh, I'm knitting with my tail. No, I'm not. But if you do this, you're guaranteed, because you leave the edge stitches as 2, the first and the last stitch are 2, and you double all of the center ones, it doesn't matter how many stitches you cast on, whether it's even or not, because you will end up with an even number of stitches. And the other nice thing about doing it this way is you know exactly how wide the piece is going to be, because it will be, the edge of the piece, the end of the piece where you cast on and where you bind off, you reduce down to the number of stitches wide that you want it to be, so there's no flare at the beginning and the end of your rectangle. So for example, if you're making a scarf. So now you can see I have twice as many stitches, and I can work them as soon as I want to. So I could knit this first stitch to keep a selvage edge, and then I could start immediately with the purl stitch. So I slip that one purlwise with the yarn in front, and then I knit a stitch, and then I slip. So it's a pretty fast, because you're not actually doing ribbing, you're not actually working the purl stitches, you're just slipping them. It goes pretty quickly. Just remember to knit your knit stitches. And you're going to get to the end of the row. So this time I didn't start with the knit stitch. I'm going to get to the end of the row and I'm going to knit 2 together, 2 at a knit 2, not together, just knit 2. Okay, so now I'm on the other side. I'm going to knit the first stitch. That's my selvage. And then I'm going to bring the yarn forward immediately as I did before. So there's no rule that says you have to start with the knit stitch. So I'll go a little bit further so you can see the effect. So in Mary Thomas's, she doesn't tell you to cast on half as many stitches as you, or as many stitches as you want, or half as many stitches. She doesn't really give you any guidance about that, but what I found is that unless you do this, sorry, that should be a knit stitch. Unless you cast on more at the beginning, you won't be able to be as wide. So you can see it looks a little bit more crowded. If you don't change color in the row, there will be no connection between the two sides. So if you use the same yarn, what I'm essentially doing is just knitting these stitches on the outside of this side of the fabric. Whoops. And by using my I'm talking and knitting at the same time, and it doesn't always turn out well. So by using my working yarn to weave in between the stitches, and then we're going to end with a knit 2. So we don't begin with a knit 2, we begin with a knit 1 for the selvage, and immediately start weaving. So if you wanted to add another color in a stripe, all you would need to do is change color at the beginning of the row, or the beginning of the round. So now I'm just going to start knitting with the orange. And as I said, you can hide the ends in the fabric. So this will give you a good visual of what's happening. So I've brought the yarn forward and I'm moving it back and slipped the stitch purlwise. Then I move it back to the right side of the work, or the far side of the work, and then I knit the stitch. Then I move the yarn close to me, slip the stitch purlwise, move it back away from me to the other side of the work, and knit the next stitch. So you can see only the knit stitches are being worked on this side of the fabric, and the purl stitches are being woven around with the working yarn. When I turn, so when I work the first half of those stitches, then every other stitch is orange and every other stitch is pink, and the remaining stitches are pink. So when I come to the end and I knit my 2, that's the beginning of that changing. And now you can see on this side that none of the knit stitches have been worked. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to make sure that I weave around the ones that are orange and knit the ones that are pink. And that's how you can add a color to your double knitting. Is this as clear as mud for everybody so far? And we end with the knit 2. So now I've created a stripe of the orange, a 1-row stripe of the orange, and it appears on both sides. But you can see here what the back side of those purl stitches look like that were knit on the front. So if I went back to my pink now, if I change color and I go back to my pink, this is essentially how I did the striped scarf. I'm still knitting the edge stitch as a selvage. And I'm starting with a slip stitch. So every time I slip the stitch, I move the yarn close to me to the wrong side for that stitch. So because it's a purl stitch, I'm always moving it to the near side. And then we knit the last one.
Beth, why would a person do this method as opposed? Never mind. I think I got the answer. Never mind.
Okay. I mean, one of the reasons somebody would do this instead of just, but is because both sides of the fabric look knit. And so this is a way to avoid having to do actual ribbing. And you can do color work like Intarsia color work this way. It's a little, sorry. It's a little trickier. But it is possible. So I want to show you the technique that the lissé pattern uses. So there's the stripe in there. You can see these yarns are slightly different gauges, but it's interesting. They're a little bit different in their tension. And I've certainly noticed that in doing the lissé pattern. So this is how you can do a single yarn and add stripes to it, and it creates this pocket. So if I slid this off of here and I opened it up, you can see that the two sides of it are able to be pulled away from each other. I'm not going to take it off the needles because I want to demonstrate another thing, but you can see that the two sides can be pulled away from each other. Is my phone frozen? Am I frozen?
No,
My phone is frozen.
well, your phone is frozen, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry about that. Well, if it freezes again, please tell me and I'll get it going again. Okay, so now we have this pattern. The lissé pattern has the color on one color on one side and another color on the other side. And the technique in double knitting that's used for that is very similar with one difference, with one main difference. I'm gonna just fix my yarns so they're not catching. All right, so in this case, you knit the edge stitches, we're going to say with the main color, which is the pink. And then we want the orange to be on the facing side. So we bring them forward, both of them, and we purl with the orange. Sorry, we purl with the pink. We want the orange on this side. And then we take them both over to the back and we knit with the orange. And then we take them both to the front and we knit, sorry, we purl with the pink. And we take them both back. So they're no longer separated and we knit. So the side that you want the knit stitch to appear on is the side you knit that stitch, and the side you want the, and you purl the other one. So now, but you have to move both yarns every time. So it's kind of like doing stranded color work where you're managing both yarns at once and you're trying not to get them twisted. But it allows you to have double-faced fabric. So I get to the end of this row. Oop. Hopefully I haven't made a big mistake. And then the last one is the knit with the pink. We're going to maintain that edge. So you can see my knit stitches are orange on this side and the purl stitches were pink. Okay. So again, I'm maintaining a selvage stitch with just the pink yarn. And then I start with the orange. So I have to bring my pink forward. The orange is already there. And I'm going to purl with just the orange and then move both yarns to the back, knit with the pink. Move both yarns to the front, purl with just the orange. Knit with the pink. So there should be a nice visual difference between your two yarns. That makes it easier. So what you see is that there's still a little poke through maybe of the orange on this side, but otherwise the face of this side of the fabric becomes the one that you work as a knit. So it's kind of like stranding. It's kind of like ribbing. It's not at all like intarsia. But it does have a neat effect. And if you had, particularly if you had yarns of very different textures, and that's what they did, is they used an alpaca boucle. So here you can see this looks like the bottom where it was just plain double knitted. You can sort of see through that there's some orange in there, but it's really quite subtle. And then when you turn it over, I'm starting to create orange fabric on the back. So if you continue doing that, you'll actually make double-faced fabric that's two different colors on each face. And by alternating what you knit and purl, you can change colors, and that's how you can get the Death Star and the different things in that extreme example of the scarf. So it's what you knit on this side shows. So if I wanted to change, I could start knitting on this side. I could change the orange to pink by knitting the orange stitches with pink. So patterns that do this work with pairs of stitches, and you have to be aware of which side, whether it's the knit side or the purl side. So it is a fairly complicated way of looking at stitches, but it is definitely, to do something as straightforward. I'm going to stop sharing my phone. I'm going to go back to that pattern on Ravelry of the lissé. So this pattern here, you can see that they changed colors in the in each square. So each square, it was like 10 or 11 rows, but they kept the main color or the striping colors on one side and then the boucle yarn on the other side. So it was pretty straightforward. So this would be a good way to practice this. And it would be a really neat way. We have some of these in the store. their Softy or Sweetheart brush. But if you've ever worked with any of these fuzzy yarns, this is what the three of us who are doing the Lissé pattern decided to use as our fuzzy alpaca lining. But just think about doing a baby blanket in this style and using a fuzzy yarn on one side and a smooth yarn on the other side, and they're both machine washable. It could be a really fun way to do a baby blanket. So that is everything I had to tell you about double knitting. Any questions?
Does it take double yarn? I mean, do you buy like, double?
It doesn't necessarily, because between the stitches, it's not really a lot more than the run between stitches is normally.
Okay.
It seems like there is, but in reality, it's a very it's much less than making a whole nother stitch.
Okay.
So maybe a little bit more.
Maybe a little more.
Mhm.
So if you wanted to do a sweater that was double, that you would just buy like a half extra. Is that what you're kind of saying, or
Well, I guess
just to make sure, or?
I guess
Or a vest, to do a double stud, to do the vest kind of to make it extra warmer, or a hat or
if you
something.
wanted to do it, I would buy the same amount of the lining yarn as you bought of the outer
Main.
yarn.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Because it's going to cover the same amount of fabric.
Fabric, right.
So you're making two pieces the same size. And I don't think you need a ton more to make the one side, but you do need enough to make the, this side and this side.
Yeah.
So if that's a 10 by 10 square, then you need enough yarn to make a 10 by 10 square.
Right. Okay.
Right. So like
Yeah.
with this pattern, you need slightly, I think there's slightly more of the striping colors because it's used for the selvage at the beginning and the end, and it's used to put the pieces together.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I think that's the only real difference.
Okay. So if I went and wanted to look for a pattern, I'd go in Ravelry, and what would be my little search?
So your search
Kinda.
word would be double knit.
Double knit? Okay.
And I, when I looked up Lissé, double knit was spelled without a space, all one word.
Okay.
So I found quite a few things, but if you know of a pattern, like if you look and you know of the Lissé pattern, that's always a good way in Ravelry of figuring out
Okay.
what Ravelry is calling it.
Okay. Okay. And then how do you spell that, Lissé?
Lissé, the pattern Lissé is Lisse.
Okay.
And it's by Kindred Red. The name of the designer.
Okay. Thanks.
So we it was in the Pom Pom magazine. I didn't realize that we were already out of the Pom Pom magazine. If people are interested in it, we can order more of them. I just want to show you here that even though I combined, the sides of the double knitting are still able to open up. So only if you change color in the row would the yarns get locked on the inside, but otherwise they open up like a little pillow. And that's the way that the Beekeepers Quilt is done, is by having these things be little pillows. And so then when you finish, you would just knit two together across the last row to close them up and be back to the same number. And then you would cast off the row after that.
Can I tell a silly learning story about double knitting?
Sure.
years and years ago, I read that book by Mary Thomas about double knitting, and I thought, you know, I could make a hat without a double knitted hat without having a real thick. So I just doubled my number. I mean, I used to make hats all the time, so I knew exactly. I doubled my number and I double knitted all the way. And I thought this will be really cool because I can fold it over by the ears and it'll be 4 fabric. So then I got to the top and I decreased, of course, like I do. And then I had to undo it because I didn't think ahead that it was double knit until I started decreasing, and I'm still using only 1 strand of yarn. So now the cap or the crown of the hat was just single. So I had to rip it out and carry 2 yarns at the same tube because I made it all one color. And so that's just a learning thing that now I'll never forget to do that if I ever double knit again. But if you're just carrying 1 yarn, yeah, you have to remember it's a single yarn, and what you've been doing is making 2 fabrics. And then if you're still using that single yarn, it's only going to be 1 layer.
Right.
So
I mean, it's interesting because essentially you're knitting in the round.
right. And I did make it in the round. Yeah.
And if you worked the edge stitches in alternating colors every row, you could make it actually in the round and not have the little edge.
Right.
Oh.
So, yeah, but that's, yeah, I had to undo double amount of stitches. I had to go back and so, yeah, just so Donna, if you make a hat and you don't have a pattern, remember that.
Very good. Well, thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
I'm going to stop the